worship. Raise your voices in response to God's goodness.
We praise you, Lord, for all the blessings you have given us.
Lift your hearts in sweet surrender to God's mercy.
We thank you, Lord, for hearing the prayers of our hearts.
God is good. Praise be to God.
The love and mercy of God never fails. Amen.
Well, at this time, let us go to the throne of grace and bow our hearts and our heads and take our supplications to our Lord. Heavenly Father, we come to you this morning to ask thy hand to be upon each of us. We pray for each one that is here today, that thy hand would be upon us and our families, and ask you to guide them and bless them and protect them. We ask thy hand to be upon this pandemic, the COVID-19, that has shaken our world. We do pray for those that are first responders and in the healthcare profession. Be with them as they make this stand in this fight against this disease. We just pray thy hand would be upon this. We pray for all others who are sick and shut in, or in the hospitals and nursing homes and long-term care facilities. We pray, Lord, that these people are being properly cared for and that these places are properly staffed. We just pray this morning that thy hand would be upon our troops. We pray for our leaders. We just pray that they would seek your guidance and be obedient, and pray that they would seek to work together and not against each other. We pray this morning for those who are mourning the loss of a loved one as well. May your hand be upon the service not only at our church, but at all thy churches. And may you be worshiped and praised in a way that is pleasing to you. We ask all these things in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, who taught his disciples to pray together by praying and saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Well, good morning again. Our scripture for today comes to us from Genesis chapter 18, the first 15 verses. And then we're going to switch over to finish that story in chapter 21, the first 7 verses. To begin with 1 through 15 of chapter 18. A son promised to Abraham and Sarah. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. He looked up and saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them, and he bowed down to the ground. He said, My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring a little bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. So they said, Do as you have said. And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it, and make cakes. Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant, who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared, and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. They said to him, Where wife Sarah?" And he said, "They're in the tent." Then one said, "I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent entrance behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I have grown old, and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old?' Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the set time I will return to you in due season, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. He said, "Oh yes, you did laugh." Now to finish the story, over in Genesis 21, verses 1 through 7, we have the birth of Isaac. The Lord dealt with Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to his son whom Sarah bore him. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Now Sarah said, "God has brought laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me." And she said, "Who would have ever said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age." Let us pray. Lord, our hearts this day need to be open. Help us to open them and to receive your word for us. Give us courage and hope to be the servants that you have called us to be. Amen. Well, when I was a kid growing up in Sumner, Illinois, one of my favorite things to do was to spend my allowance on comic books. Once a week, my dad would take my sister and I up to either Jones's Sundry or Pauline's and let us go through the comics. Of course, we especially loved to go to Pauline's because she would pull the covers off, get her credit from the distributors, and then she would sell the coverless comic to us kids for a nickel apiece, which really made our dollar bill stretch far. Now, I really love the war comics such as Sergeant Rock or GI Combat, but I also like the other ones like the Lone Ranger, Batman, or even the Superman series. And I really love the issues that were devoted to the origins of those super crime fighters and the super villains from whom they protected us. These books held the answers to the questions that comic book junkies like me craved to know, like how the Lone Ranger got his start, or how Clark Kent became Superman, or what made Bruce Wayne dress up like a bat. And maybe that's why I'm so fond of the book of Genesis, which had a similar relationship to the rest of the Bible as those origin comics had to the rest of my library. Of course, Genesis means origin, and the book of Genesis was full of explanation of how things got to be the way they are. From how the universe was created, how there came to be so many different languages, to how the Hebrews became God's chosen people. For if you really think about it, the story of God's chosen people has its share of almost mythic superheroes by itself. There's Noah, the original super post-apocalyptic hero. There's Jacob, who had the strength to out-wrestle an angel. And Joseph, who had the superpower of predicting the future through other people's dreams. And by the way, he also possessed the first superhero costume, his coat of many colors. Of course, they weren't always superheroes in the super squeaky clean Adam West portrayal of Batman way. They had their darker sides, kind God's power working in and through them that made them superheroes. Now, all of these Hebrew superheroes of the chosen people can trace their origins to the story of a chosen couple named Abraham and Sarah. And the superpower that Abraham and Sarah are remembered for most was their ability to have a child when they were 100 years old. Although their actual superpower was their faith in God's promise to bless Abraham with descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and make of him a great nation, even though Sarah was way past the childbearing age. Now, years went by without any sign that God was going to keep his promise of giving them a child, and that's when their faith began to waver. So, in desperation, Sarah finally told Abraham to take her Egyptian slave girl, Hagar, as a concubine. And Hagar bore Abraham a son named Ishmael, which means God hears. Not surprisingly, though, Sarah grew to resent Hagar as a threat to her privileged role as Abraham's wife, and she treated her harshly. Imagine that. But seeing her affliction, God comforted Hagar. So Hagar called God by a name that means the God who sees me, because God was not blind to her situation. Then, wouldn't you know it, God finally kept his promise to Sarah, and she gave birth to a son named Isaac. Sarah's joy at what God had done for her soon turned to resentment against Hagar's son Ishmael. For Sarah viewed Ishmael as a competitor to her son Isaac. She feared that Isaac's inheritance would have to be shared with Ishmael. At one time, Hagar and Ishmael had been a convenient plan B for providing Abraham with descendants. But now that Sarah had given Abraham a son, the slave and her child were expendable. So eventually, Sarah convinced Abraham to send both Hagar and Ishmael off into the desert alone with just some bread and water. And when those meager supplies ran out, mother and son were as good as dead. But God, the God who sees, saw Hagar's affliction. And the God who hears heard the desperate cries of the boy, and God rescued them both. Now, if this was a test of Abraham and Sarah's character, they did not exactly get what we would call a passing grade at this time. Still, though, it was through Abraham and Sarah that the Hebrews came to identify themselves as God's chosen people. But intertwined with the story of this chosen people are the other stories of other peoples, unchosen peoples, you might say. People like Hagar and Ishmael, who himself was a forerunner of the Bedouin Arab peoples. The unchosen people were the ones who were considered to be outsiders to the promise that was given to Abraham and his descendants. And because the unchosen were not included in the promise, they were believed to be untreasured by God. But that wasn't exactly what God had in mind. In fact, God said that there was a special plan for Ishmael too, that he also would become a great nation. What is even more significant is the fact that God was with the boy Ishmael as he grew. For as it turned out, Abraham and Sarah could separate Hagar and Ishmael from their clan, but not from God's. God's promise to Abraham was that through his family, all the families of the earth would be blessed. But it was never God's intention that there would be an unchosen people. Pastor Ray Medeiros tells us that unchosen people are what we call the result of human choice, not God's will. At the same time, to be a chosen people did not mean that you had special privileges. It meant that you had special responsibilities, that your advantages were given to you, that you might be a blessing to others. And chosen people seem to have a way of conveniently forgetting that. As important as Abraham is, if you were to ask a Jewish person what is the defining moment in their religious and historical identity, the answer would be something that happened generations after Abraham actually lived. For if you remember, for 400 years, the Hebrews were slaves in Egypt, the land that Hagar came from. Then the God who sees saw their affliction, and the God who hears heard their cries. Just as God had seen how Hagar had been inflicted under Sarah's treatment for her, God rescued the Hebrews. He cared for them as they wandered the desert land, and he brought them into the promised land and a promised future. Just as God had cared for Ishmael and Hagar in the desert and brought forth a great nation through Ishmael. The story of the Hebrews and the story of Hagar and Ishmael are actually mirror images of each other. In one, Sarah, the Hebrew, cruelly oppressed Hagar, the Egyptian slave. In the other, Egypt mercilessly oppressed the Hebrew slaves. In both stories, God heard and responded to the oppressed, the helpless, and the victimized. Because God's commitment to justice stands over and against God's obligation to a particular group or nation. For God is the God of the underdog, and God is free to choose the unchosen peoples of the world when they are the victims of oppression. God sees the afflictions and hears the cries of the Hagars and Ishmaels of our own time. God still seeks the welfare of the unchosen peoples of the earth, when and where the chosen people fail to be the blessing to the world that they were chosen to be. As Hagar and Ishmael discovered, it's a small step from being unchosen to being expendable. And it was in labeling Westerners as being unchosen that made those in the World Trade Tower Center expendable. And it was naming African Americans as unchosen that made those meeting to pray in the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, expendable. And it was declaring that the LGBTQ people to be unchosen that led to the crowd at the Pulse nightclub being expendable. It has always been that separating out any group as unchosen people has been the first step to denying the justice for them or justifying violence against them. God blessed Sarah with a son. But the gift was not just for Sarah or Abraham alone. It was meant for the wider world that would be blessed by the community that would come into being through this child. The outcome of Abraham's handling of the matter between Sarah and Hagar was a division of his family into categories of chosen and unchosen. But if the family is where messages about who is chosen and who is unchosen originate, it can also be the place where children or grandchildren can learn lessons about respect and caring for those that are different. For what is it that God, the God who heard the cries of both the Hebrew slaves and the child Ishmael, hears in the conversations between parents and their children? Are they words that teach acceptance or intolerance? What is it that God, the God who saw the harsh treatment of Hagar at the hands of Sarah and saw the harsh treatment of the Hebrews at the hands of the Egyptians, sees in the behaviors that we model to our children? Are they acts of hospitality or hostility that they see us extend to others who are different from us, but for whom God also has great plans in store? Now, when the Apostle Paul wrote to the Christians in Rome, he encouraged them to break free from the old destructive patterns of living that they had learned growing up in the world. He posed a question: should we continue to sin? And then he went on the next line to answer his own question with an emphatic, by no means. He then went on to explain that when we are baptized, it's like we cease to be who we were and become a new creation, no longer enslaved to sin, and with the potential to live the great plan that God has for us. Now, you don't have to be a superhero to save the world. You don't have to be a Wonder Woman, Batman, or even Superman. For you already possess the superpower that you need to make a difference. The superpower of living in the newness of the life that is yours through your relationship with Jesus Christ, which, as it turns out, is the story of the origin of God's kingdom coming on earth as it is in heaven. Amen.
Disciples, it is always a joy to gather together at the Lord's table. I'm reminded that it's not the frequency with which we gather at this table, it's the access that God has given through Jesus Christ. And through Jesus, we know that all are welcome to this table. We're also reminded of the covenant that God gives through Jesus, and it's a covenant that we recommit ourselves to as we gather around the table. The covenant that you and I have as fellow believers in Jesus Christ begins at this table by remembering the covenant that God has made with us. So as we eat and drink today, let us recommit and let us remember that all are welcome. It was on the night that Jesus was betrayed that he sat at the table with his disciples, and after giving thanks, he took the bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, "Take and eat, for this is my body broken for you." And in the same way, he took the cup, and after he had given thanks, he gave it to them to drink, saying, "This is the blood of a new covenant with God and God's creation, my blood poured out for many for the forgiveness of sin." Paul reminds us that as often as we eat of the bread and drink from the cup, we remember the Lord's death and suffering until he shall surely come again. The table of the Lord is now ready. There is room for all, and there is enough for all. May we eat and drink in remembrance of the one who loved us so. Amen.
And now, go from this place with the confidence in God's gracious love and mercy. Go ready to proclaim the good news and serve your Lord by caring for others. Amen.